Ever felt like the system is working against you, no matter how much you prove yourself? Maya Washington, a young woman from a powerful family, was about to face that very challenge. But she wasn't going to back down. Instead, she stepped into the corporate world in a way no one expected, as an intern. But there was one thing no one knew. Maya was the daughter of one of the most influential black CEOs in the country. Her mission? To expose the toxic, discriminatory practices hiding in plain sight within corporate America. Maya's life had been shaped by both privilege and responsibility. Growing up as the daughter of a self-made black CEO, she understood the immense challenges her father had faced to build his empire. She had seen how difficult it was to navigate a world that often wasn't built for people like him. People who had to fight for every inch of respect and success. This experience deeply shaped her beliefs. With privilege comes a responsibility to dismantle the systems that keep people like her father and so many others from reaching their full potential. But when she joined Prestige Financial Group as an intern, she was about to see firsthand how deeply these issues ran. On the surface, everything about Prestige seemed flawless. The grand office building, the sharp-dressed employees, the gleaming reputation, all of it screamed success. But beneath the polished surface was a world of corruption, one that thrived on bias and favoritism, a world where hard work didn't always lead to success unless you fit the right mold. Maya knew that to truly understand what was going on, she would have to be invisible, unnoticed, and just another face in the crowd. She didn't want to walk in as the CEO's daughter. She wanted to experience it all from the ground up, the discrimination, the biases, and the corporate games that others played. Her first day at Prestige felt like stepping into a whirlwind of tasks. She was immediately pushed aside, given coffee runs, administrative work, and left to fend for herself while her peers got the exciting assignments. Every time she attempted to prove herself, her efforts were met with condescension, and it didn't take long for her to realize that her presence wasn't even really valued. It was clear that people like her weren't supposed to be in these spaces. They were simply filling quotas, checking boxes for diversity. The moment she walked through the door, she was labeled, dismissed, and ignored. Her manager, Derek Williams, made his disdain clear right from the start. He didn't even bother to look at her when handing her the intern paperwork. It wasn't just that he didn't recognize her worth. It was that he didn't care to. To Derek, Maya was just another diversity hire, a token intern who was expected to amount to much. He shoved her aside, assigning her menial tasks and dismissing her without a second thought. It was all too familiar, the type of discrimination that many people of color face daily in corporate settings. But what Derek didn't know was that Maya was watching everything, taking mental notes of every demeaning comment and every piece of unjust treatment. As the hours went on, Maya observed the deeper layers of this toxic environment. She saw how certain employees, often those with connections or the right background, were treated differently. They were handed the important projects, the opportunities to move up, and the access to the decision-makers. Meanwhile, people like Maya were sidelined, pushed into roles where they wouldn't be seen or heard. It was clear to her now, Prestige wasn't just a company with a diversity problem. It was a company that thrived on inequality, where power was given not on merit, but on who you knew, what you looked like, and whether you could blend in with the status quo. The more Maya saw, the angrier she became. She knew what had to be done. She wasn't here just to endure it. She had a plan, one that would flip everything upside down. But she needed to bide her time, collect her evidence, and observe carefully. As the day wore on, she realized that Derek wasn't just a typical boss. He was a representation of everything wrong with the corporate world. His blatant disregard for anyone who didn't fit the mold was something that needed to be exposed. Maya wasn't here to play by the rules. They weren't rules meant for her to win. She was here to change the game. And while Derek and others like him might have thought they could ignore her, humiliate her, and keep her in her place, they had no idea that Maya was playing a much bigger game. With every snide comment, every task meant to undermine her, she gathered ammunition. She was going to prove that sometimes the people who are underestimated are the ones who can take down the system from the inside. But for now, she stayed calm, her mind laser-focused on the task ahead. She would expose them all, and she would do it in the most unexpected way. Part 1 ends here. Maya knew that the hardest part of her mission wasn't going to be keeping her identity a secret. The hardest part was going to be watching, day after day, as a company that claimed to be a leader in its field continued to perpetuate harmful biases. Every time she went to the break room, every time she heard a manager make a joke at someone else's expense, it made her stomach churn. But Maya wasn't just here to be uncomfortable. She was here to expose the truth. And that truth, she knew, would have the power to destroy the very foundation of this corporate giant. By the second week, Maya had settled into the routine of being an intern, fully invisible to the rest of the staff. She was no longer the wide-eyed newcomer, but the quiet observer, watching people around her, how they interacted, how they treated others, and how the toxic culture of prestige financial group flourished. And it wasn't just the senior managers like Derek who were to blame. The entire culture, from the HR department to the executives, was built on favoritism and systemic bias. People who didn't fit the corporate mold were overlooked, silenced, or pushed out. But Maya wasn't just looking for a problem. She was looking for evidence. With every assignment, she took mental notes, gathering intel on the employees who were wronged by the system. She watched as Derek and others made dismissive comments about people's backgrounds, ignored qualified individuals for promotions, and placed blame on others when their failures became too obvious. Maya documented everything, using her phone discreetly to take pictures of emails and spreadsheets that hinted at what was really going on behind the scenes. The more she saw, the more certain she became. She had to take them down from the inside. One afternoon, Derek gathered all the interns for a team-building session, though it felt more like a performance designed to reinforce his superiority. As usual, Maya was given the least important task, arranging papers on his desk, while the others were assigned to shadow senior leaders or attend important meetings. Maya bit her tongue. It was hard not to say something, but she knew that if she did, her entire plan would be ruined. The more Derek belittled her, the more determined she became to make him pay for his arrogance. It was during this meeting that Maya overheard something that would change everything. Derek and a few other senior managers were huddled together, speaking in hushed tones near the break room. They thought no one could hear them, but Maya was close enough to catch every word. Their conversation was about hiring practices, and not in the way they were supposed to talk about diversity or equal opportunities. No, Derek and his colleagues were discussing how they could skirt the diversity quotas by rejecting candidates based on their cultural fit. What they didn't realize was that Maya had already been taking notes on their behavior for days. She had heard enough to know exactly what was going on behind closed doors. The conversation made her blood boil. They weren't just discussing how to discriminate. They were actively making plans to maintain a culture of exclusion. Maya realized that this wasn't just an isolated incident. This was a pattern that was happening at every level of the company. There was no meritocracy at work here, only a system of favoritism, biases, and unethical behavior that had been running unchecked for years. But Maya wasn't one to get angry and do nothing. This was her moment. She now had the ammunition she needed to expose everything. It wasn't just about Derek anymore. It was about changing a culture that allowed these behaviors to flourish. She had gathered enough evidence to bring them down, but she wasn't going to do it just yet. First, she needed to make sure she had everything in place: the emails, the conversations, the documents, and most importantly, the allies. The following days were filled with careful maneuvering. Maya was careful not to draw too much attention to herself as she gathered more evidence. But what she didn't expect was that her quiet observation was starting to catch the eye of someone else, someone who had been watching her the entire time. It happened during a routine meeting, where Maya was asked to make copies of documents of the team. She stood by the copier, quietly going about her task, when a figure approached her. It was Marcus, the building security guard. He had always greeted her with a quiet nod, but today he looked at her with a certain intensity. "You're different," he said softly, almost as if he was trying to keep his voice from carrying. Maya looked up, a bit surprised, but smiled politely. "Different how?" "You're not like the others," Marcus continued. "I've seen a lot of interns come through here. Most of them give up within the first couple of weeks. But you—" He paused, glancing around the office before lowering his voice. "You've got something else going on." Maya's heart skipped a beat. Marcus had been working at Prestige for years, and while he was in the higher ranks of the company, he had seen and heard more than most employees. It didn't take long for him to catch on to the quiet tension that Maya was feeling every day. She had been careful, but now Marcus was starting to pick up on her game. "I'm fine," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. She didn't want to reveal too much, but she knew that Marcus's words carried weight. Marcus nodded, but he wasn't convinced. "You don't have to do this alone. I've seen things, heard things. You just have to be careful." He gave her a knowing look and then walked away, his presence lingering in the room. Maya stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Could she trust him? Did he know what she was up to? She couldn't afford to get too comfortable, but the fact that someone else had noticed the same thing she had made her realize just how much power the people behind the scenes really held. And now, she had an ally, a person who could help her take down the corrupt leaders at the top. But Marcus's advice weighed heavily on her mind. Be careful. With the clock ticking down on her time at Prestige, Maya knew the moment was fast approaching. She had everything she needed to bring down Derek and the others who had allowed this culture to fester. But she would have to be strategic, careful with every move. It was one thing to expose the corruption. It was another to make sure no one could deny the evidence she had gathered. And then it happened. The final piece of the puzzle slid into place. The final piece of the puzzle had just fallen into place. For weeks, Maya had been playing the role of the perfect intern. Quiet, diligent, and invisible. She'd been underestimated, dismissed, and pushed around, but all the while, she was gathering evidence, learning the ugly truth that had been hidden behind the company's sleek, polished exterior. She knew the corruption, the systemic bias, and the blatant disregard for merit were all deeply embedded in Prestige Financial Group. And now, after hours of humiliation, the time had come for her to make her move. But she couldn't just expose them. No, that would be too easy. Maya knew the company's executives would try to cover things up. They would bury the truth beneath layers of corporate doublespeak, find a way to shift the blame, and claim it was all a misunderstanding. That's why her plan wasn't just about revealing their wrongdoings. It was about making them face the consequences of their actions in front of everyone. It all started with a simple meeting invite. Derek had sent out a company-wide memo, calling all the interns for a final evaluation meeting. He'd already set the tone, of course. Nothing positive ever came from Derek's meetings. He was the kind of person who enjoyed putting others down, who thought nothing of humiliating people to make himself feel more important. This time, however, he had no idea that he'd just set the stage for his own downfall. Maya took her time preparing. She had already secured all the evidence she needed. Derek's emails, the recordings of documents that detailed every instance of discrimination, favoritism, and mistreatment. She had even enlisted the help of Marcus, the building security guard, who had been quietly gathering CCTV footage from the key moments that would prove her case. The stage was set. She had planned every detail. Now, she just had to wait for the right moment to strike. When the meeting began, Derek strolled into the room with the usual air of superiority. He looked around at the interns, all eager to hear what he had to say. Maya stood at the back of the room, calm and composed, waiting for her moment. Derek began with his usual performance, mocking the interns for their lack of knowledge, pretending to be disappointed in their work. His smug smile was enough to make anyone's skin crawl. But Maya wasn't just another intern anymore. She wasn't the person Derek thought she was. She was the person who was about to bring his entire empire crashing down. "Let's get this over with," Derek said as he began to walk around the room, passing out evaluations to each intern. When he got to Maya, he handed her the paper without even making eye contact. "You're good for coffee runs, maybe some filing. Basic stuff. We'll see if you can handle that level of responsibility." The word stung, but Maya kept her composure. She took the paper from Derek with a slight nod, but she didn't sit down. Instead, she stood tall and addressed the room. "I'm not here to be your coffee runner, Derek," Maya said, her voice calm but firm. The room went silent. Derek's head snapped up, surprise flashing across his face. "I'm here to show you what real responsibility looks like." Derek tried to brush it off with a laugh, but there was no hiding the unease in his expression. He knew something wasn't right, but he couldn't put his finger on it. "What are you talking about, Maya?" he sneered, trying to regain control of the room. "You're an intern. You're here to learn, not to lecture me." Maya didn't flinch. "You're right," she said, her gaze never leaving his. "I'm here to learn. But it seems like the only thing I've been learning around here is how to cover up corruption, how to perpetuate bias, and how to get ahead not by merit, but by who you know. So, let's get to the real lesson, shall we?" The room fell deathly silent as Maya reached into her portfolio and pulled out her phone. With a calm, deliberate motion, she connected it to projector, and in one swift movement, Derek's secret emails, conversations, and spreadsheets filled the large screen at the front of the room. The first email appeared. "Another diversity hire disaster incoming. We can't let these people run our industry," Maya read aloud. The words hung in the air like a cloud of poison, and the room gasped as they realized what they were seeing. The emails kept coming, dozens of them. They were filled with racist language, discriminatory practices, and plans to manipulate the system to reject qualified candidates, simply because they didn't fit the mold of the right kind of employee. Derek's face drained of color as he scrambled to shut down his laptop, but it was too late. The truth was out. Maya didn't stop there. She kept scrolling, revealing email after email, proof of how the company had been systematically discriminating against minority candidates, how Derek and his colleagues had been using coded language to get rid of people who didn't fit their vision of success. The room was filled with stunned silence as every secret was exposed. "Derek Williams," Maya continued, her voice cold and steady, "you've been in charge of this toxic culture for too long. You've been making decisions that hurt people, that destroy careers, all while lining your pockets with power you never deserved." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then she turned her attention to the rest of the room. "And you're not the only one responsible for this. Sarah, Michael, Jennifer, you've all been complicit in allowing this behavior to continue. You allowed it to fester, to become part of the company culture." The room was in chaos now. Derek was standing, pacing, trying to come up with some excuse, some way to deflect the blame, but Maya wasn't done. "Don't bother trying to cover your tracks now. Derek, you've been exposed. The culture you've nurtured here, the people you've trampled on, the lives you've ruined, all of it is out in the open, and it's time for you to face the consequences." Maya turned to the rest of the room, her gaze sweeping across the employees who had been watching this unfold. "I've spent weeks observing, documenting, and witnessing the pain that people like you have caused. Today it stops. You've made this company a hostile place for anyone who isn't part of your elite club. But guess what? It's not your company anymore. It's mine. And today, I'm firing every single one of you." The room erupted. Derek tried to fight back, but his words were weak, futile. His empire was crumbling before his eyes, and he knew there was no way out. His career, built on the backs of people he had wronged, had just been shattered. The silence of the room was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted just moments earlier. Derek Williams stood frozen, his face ashen, his attempt to maintain control crumbling as Maya's words sunk deeper. He hadn't anticipated this. He hadn't anticipated someone, anyone, would dare challenge the iron grip he had over the company, and certainly not someone like Maya. For a split second, Derek opened his mouth, as though he might speak, but the words never came. His entire empire of manipulation, condescension, and systemic corruption was exposed before everyone in that room. His well-crafted image, the one he had carefully constructed over years, was no longer something he could hide behind. In that moment, Derek was no longer a senior manager. He was just a man who had been caught, a man who had underestimated the power of truth. Maya's gaze never wavered. She stood tall, the calm center of a storm that had taken years to build, but was finally breaking down in mere minutes. Her eyes scanned the room, each person now fully aware of what was unfolding. Some looked on in disbelief, others in shock. A few were already beginning to look at her with a newfound respect. She wasn't the intern they thought they could dismiss. She was the one who had seen through their facades, their lies, and their toxic, exclusionary culture. And now it was her time to lead. "Derek." Maya's voice cut through the tense silence, her tone icy but measured. "I'll make this simple for you. You are no longer employed by this company. Your actions, your emails, your discriminatory practices, Every ounce of damage you've caused to people in this room and beyond will have consequences. At this, Derek finally found his voice, but it wasn't the commanding authority he was used to. It was the frantic, desperate voice of a man who knew he was losing everything. "You can't do this." Derek spat, his hands trembling as he tried to steady himself. "You can't just walk in here and—" "I can do this, Derek," Maya interrupted sharply. "And I will. You've made this company a place of fear, not respect. You made it a place where people like me, people who don't fit into your idea of success, are seen as lesser, as unworthy. Your actions have cost people their jobs, their dignity, their peace of mind. You were a part of that, and now you'll pay the price." The room was watching, their collective breath held. There was no turning back now. Maya had just taken control of the situation in the most powerful way possible. She had turned the tables, exposed the rot at the core of the company, and now she was standing in front of a room full of people who had been complicit in allowing it all to happen. But Maya wasn't done. She wasn't just here to fire Derek and be done with it. She was about to rewrite the entire culture of this place, to make sure nothing like this could ever happen again. "I'm not the only one who's going to leave this room today," she continued, her voice now steady, filled with undeniable authority. "Sarah, Michael, Jennifer, this company has been built on your discrimination, your disregard for merit, your use of power to control who gets ahead and who gets pushed aside. You've all been a part of the problem. So, yes, each of you will be leaving too." As Maya's words settled over the room, Sarah Chun, one of the department heads, finally spoke, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. We're just doing what we're told. The board, the higher-ups, they dictate what happens here. You think we had a choice?" She looked at her colleague for support, but the room was silent. The energy had shifted. There were no more allies here for Sarah. She was alone, and the walls were closing in. "No, Sarah, you had a choice," Maya said. "You all had a choice. You chose to turn a blind eye to the damage you were causing. You chose to ignore the employees who were suffering, the talented people you pushed out, because they didn't fit your narrow, biased definition of what success should look like. You could have been better, but you weren't." The words stung, but they were the truth, and the truth was undeniable. At that moment, Michael Torres, another senior manager, began to fidget uncomfortably, his mind clearly racing. "Maya, please, don't do this," he begged, his voice barely above a whisper. "You can't fire us all. The consequences for the company. We'll all be out of jobs." Maya's gaze softened just slightly as she looked at him. "Michael, the consequences have already been set in motion. Your actions have already caused irreparable damage to this company, both internally and externally. Your little charade of business as usual ends now. And if you think this company will fall apart without you, you're wrong. The truth is what will hold this place together." The room remained still, everyone waiting, unsure what Maya would do next. Maya reached into her portfolio and retrieved a small stack of papers, documents that had been carefully prepared. These weren't just any documents. These were the termination papers for every single person in that room who had been complicit in the corruption. She handed them out one by one, starting with Derek, and watched as the weight of the situation settled over each person. "Derek Williams," Maya read aloud from the top of the paper, "effective immediately. You are terminated for cause, based on your gross misconduct, your violations of corporate policy, and your blatant disregard for diversity, equity, and inclusion in this workplace." As she handed the papers out, the reality hit the group like a ton of bricks. Derek, the one who believed he controlled the entire building, who had dismissed Maya as nothing more than a pawn in his game, was now nothing. Not an executive, not a manager, just another person who had to face the consequences of his actions. The others in the room, Sarah, Michael, Jennifer, none of them were spared. They had all played their parts in fostering a toxic, exclusive environment that crushed those who didn't fit the mold. But Maya wasn't just firing them. She was sending a message to everyone in that room. She was showing them that power, unchecked, would always be met with accountability. We will no longer tolerate toxic behavior. We will no longer tolerate people who use their position to control, discriminate, or harm others. From this day forward, the culture of this company will change. No one is above the law. No one is above respect. And no one will get away with undermining the dignity of others. With a final sweep of her eyes, Maya turned to leave the room, the echoes of her words still hanging heavy in the air. But as she walked out, something shifted. The energy in the room had changed completely. The employees who had been silently complicit now saw Maya as something else, not just a daughter of CEO, but a leader in her own right, a force for change. As Maya stepped into the hallway, Marcus, the security guard, nodded at her from his post. She gave him a small smile, knowing that her journey wasn't over yet. This was just the beginning of something much bigger than any one person. The door to the conference room slammed shut behind Maya, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Derek and the other senior managers stood frozen, their faces pale as they stared at the termination papers Maya had just handed out. For the first time in years, they felt powerless. They had no control of the situation. They were the ones who were about to be exposed, not as leaders, but as perpetrators of a broken system. Maya had just done what no one else in the room had the courage to do. She had taken down the very people who had turned this company into a breeding ground for bias, exclusion, and corruption. But while her actions had set the wheels of justice in motion, Maya knew this was only part of the battle. The real work was just beginning. As she walked down the long hallway of the building, her mind raced with the enormity of the changes she had just set in motion. This wasn't just about firing a few bad apples. It was about shaking the very foundation of a corporate culture that had been allowed to thrive unchecked for years. She couldn't let up. This was only the start of a much bigger plan, one that would change not just Prestige Financial Group, but the entire industry. But as much as she was determined to see this through, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening. Maya had expected resistance. Sure, she had anticipated some pushback. What she hadn't expected was the support she was starting to see from people around her, the employees who had quietly watched the toxic culture persist for so long. They had been silent, afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of rocking the boat. But now, they were starting to realize that change was possible. Maya wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for them too. Just as she was lost in thought, she was stopped by a voice from behind. It was Marcus, the building security guard. "Maya," he said, his voice low but urgent. "You've done something that nobody else had the guts to do. You've taken them down. But they're not going to let this go quietly." Maya turned to face him, her expression calm but determined. "I know, and I'm ready for it." Marcus gave her a long look, his eyes narrowing with concern. "You got to be careful. These people, they don't give up that easily. They've got connections, influence. They'll try to make your life miserable. They might even try to discredit you." Maya's gaze was unwavering. "Let them. I'm not backing down. This isn't just about me. This is about everyone who's been hurt by their actions. This is about making sure that people like Derek don't have the power to destroy lives anymore." Marcus nodded slowly, clearly impressed. "I'm with you. You've got this." With that, he gave her a respectful nod and turned to walk away. Maya watched him go, the weight of his words lingering in the air. He was right. This wasn't going to be easy. She wasn't just challenging the corrupt individuals who had abused their power for years. She was challenging an entire system. But the more she thought about it, the more confident she became. She was ready for whatever was coming. Later that day, as the news of the firing spread throughout the building, the atmosphere in the office began to shift. The employees who had been silent, who had feared speaking out, began to find their voices. Whispers of gratitude circulated. It was clear that something monumental had just occurred. Maya had taken the first step toward something bigger, and now people were starting to pay attention. As Maya sat at her desk, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it quickly. It was from her father. "Proud of you. Keep going. You're doing the right thing." His words, simple yet powerful, filled her with a quiet sense of pride. This wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about creating a workplace where people felt seen, heard, and respected, where everyone, regardless of their background, had an equal shot at success. This was the kind of company her father had worked so hard to build, a company that valued people for who they were, not where they came from or who they knew. But as the hours passed, Maya's thoughts turned back to the next steps. She had a long way to go. The actions she had taken so far were just a beginning. She had dismantled the most visible layer of the toxic culture, but the deeper, more insidious problems still lurked beneath the surface. She couldn't just stop now. She had to make sure that the company didn't fall back into its old ways. She had to make sure that the new culture of respect and accountability stuck. That night, after everyone had left for the day, Maya stayed behind, poring over her notes and preparing the next phase of her plan. She was going to build a new structure, one that would support the changes she had started and make sure they were lasting. She wasn't just going to remove the bad elements. She was going to replace them with a team that truly understood the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion. She was going to bring in people who could help her build a better, more inclusive company, a company where every employee could rise to the top based on their abilities, not their connections or their race. And she wasn't going to stop until she had reshaped the entire organization. But Maya knew that change wasn't going to happen overnight. There would be challenges ahead, pushback, resistance, and obstacles she couldn't even foresee. But she was ready. She had been underestimated for far too long. Now, it was time for the world to see her for what she truly was, a leader. As Maya looked at the empty office around her, she took a deep breath and smiled to herself. This was her moment, and nothing was going to stop her from making it count. The days that followed Derek and his colleagues' firing were filled with an unexpected energy, one that Maya had never anticipated. As she moved through the halls of Prestige Financial Group, she couldn't help but notice a change. The oppressive air that had once hung over the office was now replaced with an uncertain kind of hope. People were talking, some with caution, others with quiet excitement. They were finally beginning to see that change was possible. But Maya knew better than to get comfortable. She wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Firing a few managers, though satisfying, was only the tip of the iceberg. The culture at Prestige Financial had been built over years of systemic issues, and those problems were not going to disappear overnight. She needed to ensure that the changes she had started would not only stick, but also begin to thrive. The first thing she did was bring in a group of diversity, equity, and inclusion experts, people who had worked with some of the most respected companies in the world to transform toxic corporate cultures. She wasn't just going to talk about diversity. She was going to put in place systems that would support it at every level, from recruitment to promotion, from daily interactions to long-term strategy. Everything was going to change. But change, as Maya quickly realized, was never easy. The resistance didn't come from the people she had already fired. It came from the ones who were still in the building. Those who had been playing the game of exclusion, who had been part of the problem, were the ones who were afraid of losing control. And Maya knew exactly who they were. The first target on her list was Patricia Hayes, the head of HR. If anyone had been complicit in the toxic culture, it was her. As the person who controlled hiring and firing decisions, Patricia had turned a blind eye to the company's bias problems for far too long. She had allowed Derek and the other managers to thrive, knowing full well that they were perpetuating a harmful and discriminatory environment. Maya's plan was simple. She was going to expose Patricia for the role she had played in allowing the company to remain so corrupt. Maya couldn't risk having anyone in charge of HR who had the power to undermine her efforts. She couldn't allow Patricia to sit behind closed doors, making decisions that could undo everything she was trying to build. As Maya walked into the HR department that afternoon, she was met with an uneasy silence. It was as if the entire department was holding its breath, waiting for her to make the first move. Patricia, sitting at her desk, looked up with a forced smile, but there was a nervousness in her eyes that Maya didn't miss. "Maya," Patricia said, her voice tight, "I wanted to speak with you about the changes you're implementing. I understand you're trying to make improvements, but you need to understand." "No, Patricia," Maya interrupted, her voice steady but firm. "You don't understand. You've been part of the problem for far too long. It's time for you to go." Patricia's face faltered, confusion and fear creeping in. "What do you mean? I've always done what I could to support the company." "I've supported the company?" Maya raised an eyebrow, cutting her off. Supported the people who have systematically excluded others? You allowed Derek and his team to create an environment where people like me were treated as less than. You're not supporting the company. You're upholding the very system I'm trying to break. Patricia's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She had nowhere to go, no argument left. The truth had come for her too. Maya stood tall, unwavering. I've already spoken with the board. Your termination is effective immediately. You won't be taking part in this company's future. With that, Maya turned on her heel, leaving Patricia to sit in stunned silence. It was done. The next domino had fallen. As she made her way back to her office, Maya felt a rush of relief, but only for a moment. This wasn't just about getting rid of the people who had wronged her. This was about ensuring that the company could rebuild itself into something better, more equitable, more inclusive, and more honest. But even though she had made enormous strides, Maya wasn't naive. She knew that she needed to strengthen her foundation before the corporate world came after her. The backlash was inevitable. She could already sense the whispers, the gossip, the people who were angry at her for shaking up their comfortable world, the ones who had gotten used to operating above the law, the ones who had long since abandoned integrity for power. The next morning, Maya sat in the boardroom, facing the remaining executives. The tension in the room was palpable. No one spoke for the first few minutes, as they all waited for her to make her next move. They had seen what happened to Derek, Sarah, Michael, and Patricia. Now, they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maya didn't make them wait long. I've made the necessary changes in the leadership structure, she began, looking each person in the eye. But this is just the beginning. We're going to build a company that doesn't just talk about diversity and inclusion. We're going to make it real. We're going to make it the core of everything we do. And if anyone here is uncomfortable with that, now's the time to speak up. The room was silent. No one moved. Everyone was now fully aware of what Maya was capable of. Her strength, her ability to lead, and her unwavering commitment to doing the right thing had already become a force to be reckoned with. We will create a task force dedicated to diversity. Every department will undergo mandatory bias training. We will implement blind recruitment processes, and every single promotion will be evaluated based on merit, not connections. Maya paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. From now on, this company will be judged by how we treat each other, by how we treat our employees, not by how much money we can make or how many awards we can win. And then, with a slight, almost imperceptible smile, Maya added, if you're not on board with that, feel free to walk out now. I'm not interested in your excuses. The room remained still, and for the first time in her life, Maya felt like the entire company had finally fallen silent in respect. Not fear, but true respect. The kind of respect that comes from knowing someone will fight for what's right, no matter the cost. As the meeting wrapped up, Maya stood and addressed the board one final time. I know this will take time, but I promise you this. When we're done, this company will not just lead in profits, it will lead in culture, and will prove that doing the right thing is always the right thing. Walking out of the boardroom, Maya's steps were steady, her confidence unwavering. She had faced resistance, exposed corruption, and taken down some of the most powerful people in the building. But now, she was ready to build something better. She wasn't just the daughter of a CEO anymore. She was the one who had changed the future of Prestige Financial Group, and she wasn't done yet. The final chapter of this story was the most crucial, and Maya knew it. The storm she had caused was only just beginning to settle, but the real work, transforming an entire corporate culture, was something no one could rush. The changes she had started were only the beginning of what would ultimately reshape Prestige Financial Group. But Maya wasn't intimidated. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she had worked toward every single day of the past few weeks. She was about to lead the charge that would redefine what it meant to be truly successful in the corporate world. It wasn't about the people she had already fired, though that was a necessary step. It wasn't just about dismantling the toxic hierarchy that had allowed the worst elements of the company to thrive. It was about building something new, a place where merit, respect, and inclusivity were the foundation, not a side note. And Maya knew that was going to take more than just a few policies and speeches. It would take real action, real systems, and a commitment to follow through on the promise of change. As the days went by, Maya became a force to be reckoned with. She didn't waste time. Every decision, every new hire, every policy change was carefully calculated to ensure that what was happening at Prestige Financial Group would not be just a temporary change. It was going to be permanent. Maya understood the deep, ingrained power of old corporate structures, and she knew that simply firing a few people wasn't enough to break it down. No. What she had done was plant the seed for a long-term transformation, a shift that would take time but would ultimately change everything. The first step was instituting new leadership. Maya didn't just want to bring in people who could fill the gaps left by the managers she had fired. No, she was determined to find people who genuinely understood the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. She wanted leaders who believed in the same things she did, people who would work to elevate others, not tear them down. Maya didn't hesitate. She began reaching out to top candidates, individuals from diverse backgrounds who had the skills and vision to help build something new, people who had been overlooked by the old regime because they didn't fit the traditional corporate mold. She brought in new heads of departments that had long been neglected, making sure to hire people who weren't just qualified on paper, but who also understood the values of transparency and fairness that now guided Prestige's leadership. At the same time, Maya worked tirelessly to implement comprehensive diversity training for every department. No one was exempt, not even the employees who had been with the company for years. She wanted to make sure that everyone, whether they were in entry-level positions or senior leadership, understood the company's new direction. She understood the challenge she was facing. Changing the culture wasn't just about bringing in new blood. It was about getting the old guard to understand why their mindset was wrong. Maya wasn't naive enough to think that everyone would be on board right away, but she was ready for that fight. The future of Prestige depended on it. The new training programs weren't just about teaching people to be politically correct. They were about challenging deep-seated biases, teaching employees how to recognize and confront their own assumptions, and making sure that everyone felt valued and heard. Maya wasn't just implementing policies. She was changing mindsets. One day, Maya found herself in a meeting with a new senior management team, people who had quickly become the cornerstones of her vision for the company. They were all gathered in the sleek, glass-walled boardroom, sitting at the same table where, just weeks before, Derek and his colleagues had made cruel decisions that impacted so many. As Maya stood before them, ready to speak, she felt a surge of pride. This was what success looked like, not the high-rise buildings or the shiny awards, but the faces around this table. The people who had been given the opportunity to lead because of their skills, their passion, and their commitment to doing what was right. "We've made a lot of progress in a short time," Maya began, her voice steady and resolute. "But we've still got a long way to go. I know the road ahead isn't going to be easy. There will be people who resist, people who want to see us fail. But we have the chance to create something that's not just about the bottom line. We have the chance to build a culture that values people, not just profits." She looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes. "And that starts with every single one of you. Your responsibility is not just to this company, but to every person who walks through our doors, to make sure that they know they belong here, that they have an equal shot at success. This is not just about building a diverse workforce. It's about building a place where people can thrive, where their voices matter, and where they can rise to the ranks based on their abilities and contributions." The room was silent, and Maya could feel the weight of her words landing on each person there. This wasn't just a pep talk. It was a call to action. As she finished speaking, one of the new department heads, a woman named Julia, spoke up. "Maya, this is a huge undertaking, but I can tell you that we're all with you. We believe in this. We're ready to make the changes that are needed." Maya nodded, feeling the wave of support from the team. "Thank you. But this is only the beginning. We need to prove it, not just with our words, but with our actions. And the first action we take is making sure that every single person in this company feels safe, heard, and valued. That's how we build a strong company." As the days turned into weeks, the changes at Prestige began to take root. Employee satisfaction soared. The diversity numbers, which had once been a sore point for the company, began to climb. Employees from all backgrounds were finding a voice in the workplace, and many of them expressed how they finally felt like they could be their authentic selves without fear of retribution. Maya's leadership, once seen as unconventional and risky, was now the shining example of what corporate reform could look like. She had proved, without a doubt, that when you put people first, when you create a culture where every individual has a chance to succeed, not just survive, the company itself will thrive. Prestige was no longer just a financial powerhouse. It had become a beacon of hope for those who had once been left out of the conversation. But even as she saw the fruits of her labor take shape, Maya knew her work wasn't over. She wasn't just going to stop at Prestige Financial. Her next move was clear. Maya was already strategizing how to take this mission beyond her company, how to spread the message of true inclusion and accountability across the entire corporate world. She knew it wouldn't happen overnight, but she had set the wheels in motion, and she wasn't stopping now. Maya Washington wasn't just a CEO's daughter anymore. She was the face of a revolution that had started with one small act of defiance and had grown into something that would change the corporate world forever.